Don't make me explain why I'm standing here, Damon Callahan said, and every conversation in the mansion died at once. Elena Brooks had never seen a room fall silent so quickly. 1 second, the grand ballroom of the Callahan estate had been filled with soft music, crystal glasses, and the polished laughter of Chicago's wealthiest guests. The next, all Elena could hear was the faint ticking of the antique clock above the marble fireplace. She stood near the edge of the room in her simple black and white uniform, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. A few feet away, Vivian Hart, Damon's elegant fiancée, stared at her with open irritation. "I asked you to bring the necklace," Vivian said, "not to stand there looking confused." "I brought it, ma'am," Elena replied quietly. Her voice was steady, even though her heart was racing. The necklace rested safely inside its velvet case on the nearby table. Elena had checked it twice before bringing it downstairs. She knew how carefully the Callahan household handled expensive belongings. She also knew that one mistake could cost her the job she depended on. Vivian glanced at the case, then back at Elena. "Then why is it not where I told you to put it?" Elena hesitated. "Because Mr. Callahan's assistant asked me to leave it on the table until he arrived." A few guests exchanged amused looks. Vivian's expression hardened. "You heard me give an instruction, Elena." "Yes, ma'am." "Then why are you arguing with me?" "I'm not arguing." The words were barely above a whisper, but they changed the atmosphere. Vivian stepped closer. "Do you know what your problem is? You have started forgetting your place." Elena lowered her eyes. She had heard versions of those words before, but never from someone standing in the center of Damon Callahan's home, wearing a diamond engagement ring that seemed brighter than the chandelier above them. "I know my place," Elena said. "Good," Vivian replied. "Then act like it." A quiet laugh came from somewhere among the guests. Elena felt the warmth rising in her face. She wanted to disappear into the service hallway, back to the small staff room where nobody watched her every movement. But before she could step away, Vivian picked up the velvet case and held it out. "Open your bag." Elena froze. "Ma'am." "You heard me." The room seemed smaller now. Elena looked at the guests, then at the case in Vivian's hand. "I haven't taken anything." Vivian smiled without warmth. "Then you should have nothing to worry about." Elena slowly reached for her bag. She did not know that someone had been watching from the doorway. Damon Callahan had arrived earlier than anyone expected. He had heard only the last few words, but his eyes had already moved from Elena's lowered face to the velvet case in Vivian's hand. Then he noticed something that made him stop completely. The necklace was not where it had been moments before, and Elena's bag was still zipped shut. The room had gone quiet, but Elena could still feel every pair of eyes on her. She slowly reached for the zipper of her worn black handbag, her fingers unsteady now. She had spent 6 months working inside the Callahan estate, learning every rule, every hallway, every expectation. She knew the difference between the silver used for family dinners and the silver reserved for formal guests. She knew which flowers Vivian preferred and which rooms Damon never wanted disturbed. More than anything, she had learned that staying invisible was the safest way to keep her job. Elena opened the bag and turned it toward Vivian. A small wallet, a set of keys, a folded grocery receipt, and a bottle of hand lotion were visible inside. Nothing else. Vivian leaned closer anyway. "Empty it." Elena looked up. "There's nothing else." "Then empty it." Elena placed each item on the table, one at a time. The guests watched with uncomfortable fascination. Some looked away. Others did not. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes stood near the service entrance, her expression tight with concern, but she remained silent. She had worked for powerful families long enough to understand how quickly a simple accusation could become a career-ending problem for someone like Elena. Vivian picked up the wallet and opened it. $38, she said with a faint smile. "You carry more than that when you work in this house." Elena swallowed. "That's all I have with me." Vivian placed the wallet down. "How unfortunate." Elena said nothing. Across the room, Damon remained near the doorway. He had not announced himself. He had not interrupted. His gaze stayed fixed on the table, then on Vivian, then finally on Elena. He noticed the detail that everyone else seemed to miss. Elena was not afraid of being caught with the necklace. She was afraid of being accused of something she had not done. Vivian picked up the velvet case again. "Perhaps you should check the lining." Elena looked at her in disbelief. "I didn't touch it after I brought it downstairs." "You expect me to believe that?" Vivian asked. A diamond necklace worth nearly $80,000 disappears, and somehow the maid standing beside it knows nothing? The word maid landed harder than it should have. Elena felt her shoulders tighten, but she kept her voice calm. I know where I left it. Damon finally moved. His shoes made a quiet sound against the marble floor. Several guests turned. Vivian noticed him first, and the color in her face changed. Damon. He said nothing. His attention went to the necklace case, then to Elena's bag, then to the small side table where the necklace had originally been placed. Who moved the case? He asked. Vivian answered too quickly. I did. Damon looked at her. Why? She hesitated. Because I wanted to inspect it. His eyes narrowed slightly. Before or after you accused Elena? Vivian went completely still. No one in the room spoke. Then Damon walked to the table and picked up Elena's grocery receipt. The timestamp was visible at the bottom. His expression changed when he read it. Elena had been in the kitchen at the exact time Vivian claimed the necklace had disappeared, and Damon now had the first piece of evidence that could prove it. Damon placed the receipt back on the table, but he did not take his eyes off Vivian. The soft music had stopped completely, leaving only the quiet hum of the chandelier above them. Elena stood beside the table with her belongings gathered in her hands, wishing she could disappear before the situation became any more embarrassing. She had done nothing wrong, yet somehow she felt as though she were standing in the middle of a courtroom. The receipt says 7:14, Damon said calmly. Where were you at 7:14? Elena answered immediately. In the kitchen, preparing coffee for Mrs. Hayes. Damon nodded once. Who saw you? Mrs. Hayes stepped forward. I did. Vivian folded her arms. That proves nothing. She could have left the kitchen afterward. She could have, Damon agreed. His calm response seemed to surprise everyone. Then he turned toward Elena. Did you leave the kitchen? No, sir. Not even for a minute. No, Damon studied her face. Elena had expected suspicion, perhaps even anger, but there was something different in his expression now. He was listening, truly listening. Why did you bring the necklace downstairs? He asked. Elena explained that Vivian had asked her to retrieve it from the upstairs dressing room before the guests arrived. She had carried the velvet case directly downstairs and placed it on the side table, exactly as instructed by Damon's assistant. Vivian interrupted. And I told her to bring it to me. Damon turned toward her. Did you? Yes. Then why was it still on the table? Vivian hesitated. Because she misunderstood me. Elena looked down. She had heard enough. She knew how this ended when someone powerful decided to believe another powerful person. Damon, however, seemed more interested in the details. What happened after Elena placed the case on the table? He asked. Vivian glanced around the room. I don't remember. Damon's expression remained unreadable. You don't remember? There were guests arriving. I had a dozen things to handle. Yet you remember that Elena was standing beside the necklace. Vivian's lips pressed together. She was the maid responsible for it. Damon said nothing for several seconds. Then he turned toward Marcus Reed, who had been standing quietly near the entrance. Check the security system. Marcus nodded and left. Elena watched him disappear down the hallway. Something about Damon's composure unsettled her. He was not defending her yet, but he was no longer accepting Vivian's version of events either. Vivian seemed to sense the shift. Damon, you're making this far more complicated than it needs to be. Maybe. He looked at her. Or maybe someone expected me not to ask questions. Her face tightened. Before she could respond, Marcus returned carrying a tablet. Mr. Callahan, he said, there's something you should see. Damon took the tablet and watched the security footage in silence. The recording showed Elena placing the necklace case on the table, then Elena walking away toward the kitchen. Vivian remained in the room. Damon watched the screen for another few seconds. Then his eyes narrowed. Someone else had entered the ballroom immediately after Elena left, and that person was carrying something small in their hand. The person on the security footage moved quickly across the edge of the ballroom, keeping their face turned away from the camera. Damon watched the recording twice, his expression becoming more serious each time. Elena stood several feet away, still holding her handbag against her side. She recognized the figure before anyone said a word. It was one of the household staff, Daniel Parker, a young assistant who had worked at the estate for nearly a year. He had been in the ballroom earlier that evening, helping the catering team arrange the tables. Pause it, Damon said. Marcus froze the footage. Damon pointed toward Daniel's hand. What is that? Marcus zoomed in. A small silver object was visible between Daniel's fingers. Vivian immediately stepped forward. That could be anything. Damon did not look at her. Keep playing. The footage continued. Daniel approached the side table where Elena had left the velvet case. He looked around, then appeared to place something beside the case before walking away. Elena felt a strange chill. Mr. Callahan, she said quietly. Daniel was helping in the kitchen earlier. Damon turned toward her. You know him? Only from work. Has he ever spoken to you about the necklace? Elena shook her head. No. Vivian gave a small, impatient sigh. Damon, this is ridiculous. Daniel probably moved it by mistake. We have guests waiting, and you're turning a missing necklace into some kind of investigation. Damon finally looked at her. You were the one who accused Elena. Vivian stiffened, because she was standing next to it. So was everyone else. His words were quiet, but they carried across the room. The guests became even more uncomfortable. Elena lowered her eyes again. She did not want Damon fighting her battles. She had learned long ago that being noticed by powerful people could be dangerous in ways that were difficult to predict. But then Damon asked a question that made her look up. Elena, when you placed the necklace on the table, was the velvet case closed? Yes, sir. Completely closed? Yes. Did you touch it again? No. Damon nodded. He turned back to the footage. The recording showed Daniel approaching the table. He did not pick up the necklace case. Instead, he appeared to slide a small envelope beneath it. Damon paused the video again. That wasn't there before. Marcus checked the earlier recording. The envelope was absent when Elena first placed the case down. Vivian stared at the screen. For the first time that evening, her confidence seemed to weaken. Maybe Daniel planted something, she said. Damon looked at her. Maybe. Then he turned to Marcus. Bring him here. Marcus left the room. Elena watched Vivian carefully. Something had changed in her face. It was not fear exactly. It was recognition. Elena noticed Vivian glance toward the hallway, then toward the necklace case. That tiny movement told Elena something the footage could not. Vivian already knew what was inside the envelope. Damon noticed it too. He slowly closed the tablet and looked directly at his fiancée. Vivian, he said, why did you look at that envelope before I even opened it? : Writing variant equals document ID equals 74163 title equals part 6. The footsteps outside the study faded, but Richard did not move from the door. Penelope remained beside the desk, her attention fixed on the tiny mark beside Salvatore Grimaldi's signature. She had seen it before, years ago, printed in the margins of documents at Morrison Webb & Associates. It was not a logo or an official seal. It was an internal notation used by one particular partner to identify contracts that had received private approval. Where did you see that mark? Richard asked. Penelope pointed to the corner of the page. At Morrison Webb. It appeared on documents handled by James Webb. Richard's eyes narrowed. James Webb, the senior partner who supervised me. The name seemed to change the temperature of the room. Richard returned to the desk and opened the folder containing the rest of the agreement. He spread the pages across the polished wood while Penelope stood beside him, no longer looking like an employee who had accidentally crossed a line. She looked like the attorney she had once been. Show me, he said. Penelope studied the documents again, moving from the payment provisions to the confidentiality section, then back to the signature page. This isn't just about Grimaldi, she said. The structure suggests someone wanted you to believe the contract came directly from his organization. But the drafting pattern is familiar. Richard leaned closer. Meaning whoever prepared this may have copied the strategy from the same legal team that handled my case. Richard was silent for several seconds. Then he picked up his phone. Call my general counsel. He paused. Actually, don't. I want the original file from the first draft, not the version they sent me. He ended the call and looked at Penelope. If your theory is right, someone has been feeding my lawyers a polished version of the same trap. Penelope nodded slowly. And they expected you to sign before anyone noticed. Richard walked to the window overlooking Chicago. The last light of afternoon had faded behind the buildings, leaving the glass dark enough to reflect his face. For 5 years, he had trusted his instincts more than paperwork, more than advisors, more than promises. Yet this time, the danger had been hidden in language so ordinary that even experienced attorneys had missed it. Behind him, Penelope turned another page. Then she stopped. Richard. He looked back. What? There are 2 dates here. She held up the document. The contract says the final terms were approved last Friday. But this revision number shows it was created 3 weeks earlier. Richard crossed the room. You're certain? I am. She traced the revision code with her finger. And this code isn't from Grimaldi's office. Richard stared at it. Whose is it? Penelope took a slow breath. Morrison Webb and Associates. The words landed softly, but their meaning was enormous. Her former firm had not merely been connected to the kind of contract that ruined her career. It appeared to have prepared a version of Richard's agreement before Grimaldi's final proposal had even reached him. Richard's expression changed. Suspicion became certainty. You told me someone destroyed your career using this exact method. Penelope nodded. And now the same people may be trying to use it on you. He looked at the document once more, then at the woman who had spent months cleaning his house while carrying a secret no one had bothered to see. Then we're not looking at a bad contract, he said quietly. We're looking at a pattern. Penelope's fingers tightened. Arrow, colon, colon, colon. Writing variant equals document ID equals 81642. Title equals Part 7. Penelope did not recognize the name at first. She recognized the initials. 2 small letters beside the revision code, almost invisible beneath the glare of the desk lamp, carried her back to a conference room she had spent 2 years trying to forget. JW, she whispered. Richard watched her face change. James Webb. Penelope nodded slowly. He was the partner who supervised my case. Richard pulled the document closer. Then explain everything. Penelope took a breath and began with the language she remembered most clearly. She showed him how the arbitration provision worked with the confidentiality section, then how the indemnity language quietly shifted responsibility onto his company. One clause alone looked ordinary. Together, they created a structure that could leave Richard responsible for disputes while limiting his ability to challenge them. That's the trap, she said. They don't need you to misunderstand one sentence. They need you to read every sentence separately. Richard remained silent as she moved through the pages. Her confidence grew with every explanation, not because she wanted to impress him, but because the law was the one place where she had once known exactly who she was. Look here, she continued. The definition of affiliated entities is unusually broad. If Grimaldi transfers this agreement to another company, your obligations follow automatically. Richard's brow tightened. And theirs? Not necessarily. She turned another page. Their obligations can be reassigned. Yours cannot. Richard stared at the paragraph. Then he looked at her. How did my attorneys miss this? Penelope gave a small, tired smile. Because whoever wrote it wanted them to miss it. The room became quiet again. Richard walked toward the bookshelf and stood with his hands resting against the dark wood. His entire manner had changed. Earlier, Penelope had been an employee standing under suspicion. Now he was listening to her as an equal voice in a room where decisions worth millions were made. What would you do? He asked. Penelope looked at the contract. I would not sign it. I would request the original drafting history, every version, every email connected to the revisions, and every person who had access before it reached your desk. Richard nodded once. Done. He reached for his phone, but Penelope stopped him. Not yet. His eyes returned to hers. Why? Because if the same people who damaged my career are involved, they may already know I recognize the pattern. Richard understood immediately. This was no longer only about protecting his business. It was about discovering why Penelope had been pushed out of a legal career she had earned. He lowered the phone. Then we do this carefully. For the first time since she had entered the mansion months earlier, Penelope felt something unfamiliar. Not safety exactly. Trust. Richard returned to the desk and opened the final attachment in the digital file. A scanned email appeared on the screen, dated 3 weeks before Grimaldi had submitted his proposal. The sender was James Webb. The recipient was someone whose name made Penelope's breath catch. It was the same investigator who had signed the report that ended her legal career. Richard looked at her. Penelope stared at the screen, realizing the connection was no longer a theory. Someone from her past had been involved before the contract ever existed, and now they had left behind the first piece of proof. Colon, colon, colon. Writing variant equals document ID equals 29417, title equals Part 8. Richard read the investigator's name twice, then closed the file with deliberate care. The study was quiet except for the faint hum of the city beyond the windows. Penelope could feel the old fear returning, the same cold pressure she had carried since the day her career disappeared. "I know that name," Richard said. Penelope looked up. "From where?" "He reviewed one of my companies 6 years ago." Richard returned to his desk and opened another folder. "At the time, I thought he was an independent compliance consultant. He wasn't." Penelope moved closer. Richard pulled up an old corporate record, followed by a series of archived invoices. The investigator had been paid by a consulting company that appeared unrelated to Morrison Webb, but the registered address was the same building as the law firm. Penelope stared at the screen. "That's not a coincidence." "No," Richard said. "It isn't." He searched through several older files, each one revealing another connection. A consultant, a legal review, a private advisory group. Different names, different companies, but the same small network of addresses and initials. Penelope felt her breathing change. "They built layers between themselves and the documents," she said. "Exactly." Richard looked at her. "You were never the problem." The sentence struck harder than she expected. For years, she had replayed those meetings in her mind, wondering whether she had missed something, whether she had spoken too soon, whether she had somehow failed the profession she loved. Hearing Richard say it so simply made the carefully built wall around those memories begin to crack. "They needed someone to blame," she whispered. "And I was the easiest person." Richard shook his head. "You were the person who noticed." He opened the scanned email again. This time, Penelope noticed something she had missed before. The message from James Webb contained an attachment. Richard clicked it. A spreadsheet appeared, filled with dates, contract numbers, and initials. Penelope leaned toward the screen. "Stop." Richard froze the page. She pointed to one row. That contract number. It matched the acquisition case she had worked on 3 years earlier. Richard looked from the spreadsheet to her. "The case that ended your career?" "Yes." Her voice was barely audible. The spreadsheet showed that the disputed contract had been reviewed 2 days before Penelope ever received it. Beneath the review date were 3 initials. One belonged to James Webb. Another belonged to the investigator. The third was unfamiliar. Richard highlighted it. "Who was RC?" Penelope stared at the letters. "I don't know." "Look at the date." She did. It was the same day she had submitted the corrected contract to Webb. Her face went still. "They knew I had fixed it." Richard nodded. "Which means the version they later accused you of creating was already in their system before you submitted anything." For the first time, Penelope saw the shape of the truth. She had not been framed because of a mistake. She had been positioned to take responsibility for a document someone else had deliberately created. Richard printed the spreadsheet and placed it in a folder. "Your past isn't just connected to this contract," he said. "It explains why this contract was sent to me." Penelope looked at him. "Why me?" Richard's answer came slowly. "Because whoever designed this knew you were working here." The room went silent. Then Richard opened one final record, an employee background request dated 6 weeks earlier. The request listed his estate, his staff, and one name highlighted in yellow. Penelope Carter. Someone had investigated her before she ever noticed the contract. And now they knew the person they had once silenced was sitting inside R: Writing variant equals document ID equals for 6285 title equals part 9. By the time morning light reached the windows of Richard Castellano's study, the contract had been removed from consideration, but the truth it had exposed was only beginning to settle into place. Richard sat behind the mahogany desk with the original records arranged in precise stacks before him. Penelope stood across from him, holding the final document that had once seemed impossible to prove. The evidence was now clear. The disputed contract had been drafted from an earlier template connected to Morrison Webb and Associates, altered before Grimaldi submitted his proposal, and reviewed by the same investigator whose report had destroyed Penelope's legal career. The unfamiliar initials belonged to a consultant who had worked closely with both parties. Nothing had been accidental. Penelope had not failed as an attorney. She had discovered a flaw someone wanted hidden, and instead of correcting the system, they had allowed her reputation to carry the blame. Richard looked at her for a long moment. "You were right." Penelope lowered her eyes. Those 3 words carried more weight than he realized. For 2 years, she had heard versions of the opposite. She had been careless, difficult, disloyal. Unprofessional. Now the man whose contract she had protected was telling her that the instinct that cost her everything had been the instinct that saved him. Richard pushed a folder toward her. Inside were copies of the original drafts, correspondence, payment records, and the archived spreadsheet. My attorneys are sending these records to an independent legal review team, he said, and I want your name included in the report. Penelope looked up. Why? Because you found the problem. She shook her head gently. I don't need anyone to call me a hero. Richard's expression softened. I'm not asking them to. I'm asking them to tell the truth. Later that afternoon, Richard received confirmation that the contract would not be signed and that an external review had begun into the connected firms and consultants. The people responsible would have to answer for their decisions through the proper legal channels. No threats were made. No dramatic confrontation followed. The truth was enough. Penelope returned to the study before leaving for the day. The same desk was there, the same polished wood, the same afternoon sunlight falling across the floor. But she no longer felt invisible inside the room. Richard stood near the window when she entered. There's something else, he said. He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter from an independent law firm offering to review her professional record and assist with restoring her legal standing. Penelope read it twice. Her eyes filled, but she kept her composure. You arranged this? I made the introduction, Richard said. What happens next is yours. That distinction mattered. He wasn't giving her a new identity. He was giving her back the chance to choose one. Penelope folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest. Thank you. Richard nodded. You earned it long before you met me. She looked around the study one final time, remembering the frightened woman who had once entered this room with a cleaning cloth in her hand and a secret buried behind her silence. That woman was still part of her, but she was no longer ashamed of her. As she walked toward the door, Richard stopped her with one final sentence. Penelope. She turned. Never let someone else's decision about your worth become your definition of yourself. She smiled through the tears in her eyes and stepped into the hallway. Behind her, the contract remained unsigned. The hidden scheme was finally exposed, and the woman everyone had underestimated had done what no powerful attorney in the room had managed to do. She had seen the truth because she refused to stop looking. And that day, the world remembered what dignity looks,